Hi, I'm Mark Albertson, and welcome to Tech Closeup, or should we say, welcome to Mars? Sure feels like the red planet here at the NASA Ames Mars exhibit at Moffett Field at Mountain View. This is one of those places which showcases Silicon Valley innovation, as well as the people behind Silicon Valley technology, which just happens to be what Tech Closeup is all about. In this month's program, we'll talk with Cindy Robbins-Roth, a leading expert in the expanding field of biotechnology. We'll meet the team at the NASA Ames Center for Nanotechnology, where the science of making future high-tech products smaller, faster, and better is taking us in some fascinating new directions. And Christina King shows us how one nonprofit has successfully combined technology with social leadership to help people and communities around the world. There's a really big deal these days about a little tiny science called nanotechnology. It's research that could lead to products that are faster, smaller, more powerful than we've ever had before. Well, we wanted to know, what's this big deal really all about? So we spent some time at the Nanotechnology Research Center here at NASA Ames, where they're onto some breakthroughs that could literally be out of this world. The Silicon Valley's next big thing is, well, too small to see.
It's approximately about 10,000 times, smaller than the average, thickness of a human hair.
Now that's really small. But when NASA Ames researchers heat up tiny grains of carbon, they form a forest of microscopic tubes, so-called nanotubes that just might change the world.
I can go on probably for days about all the benefits that human beings are going to see, and I think the Valley is going to be at the forefront of that development.
And they call that forefront nanotechnology, science that makes materials smaller, lighter, and stronger.
The carbon nanotube has got remarkable properties. It's got mechanical properties where the carbon nanotube is about 100 times stronger than steel, but it only weighs 1/6. So the bottom line is actually when things are so small, their properties are extremely different, from when they are big. So what scientists are trying to do right now is, how can we take advantage of these change in properties and do something useful?
Useful as in lightweight devices that make $100,000 a pound trips to Mars more practical. In fact, nanotechnology developed at NASA Ames will allow a future robot rover to study Martian rocks.
We were able to go from something that's on the order of this size to this. And this is actually the X-ray tube that we're going to fly to Mars on my instrument.
Back here on Earth, nanotechnology may shrink cell phones and computers. A nanofilm may coat fabric so clothing never stains. Or how about the worry-free flush?
A Japanese company called Toto today sells the Toto toilet, and that's a self-cleaning toilet based upon nanoparticles. So biofilms cannot form, so your days of cleaning toilets are gone forever.
Carbon nanotube is this magical material. On the one hand, it has got the properties good enough to use it in structural application like construction. On the other hand, it has got wonderful electronic properties where people are looking at logic and memory chips.
Now, nanotechnology's not all that easy. Billions of nanotubes need to cooperate and cluster the right way.
You might want to have a higher density or lower density growth. You might want to have taller or shorter, longer or shorter carbon nanotubes. And depending on your application, you have to tailor your growth to that application. The trick is to be able to grow the structures that you're wanting.
Yet nano's growing around the world. Hundreds of billions of dollars invested, and the Silicon Valley may cash in, thanks to world-class brain trust and lots of venture capital.
The Stanford has the nanofab. Really all of the major universities and research groups here, and I include Agilent, Hewlett-Packard, IBM, Alberton Labs, and so forth. You can do a lot of co-development at these facilities at a very modest cost.
But Valley Business remembers the dot-com bust, so there's concern that too much hype might hurt nanotechnology too.
It has everything to do with the fact that stockbrokers, investment bankers, etc., have a financial benefit in hyping a particular industry. So I think, yes, there will be a bubble at some point.
Once upon a time, biotechnology helped boost the Valley's economy. Now there's hope for nanotechnology to do the same thing. But the Valley faces stiff global competition, a race to turn the littlest things into big profits.
This is a cutting edge. This is a technology which is just now being developed and will continue to grow for the next, couple of decades.
And for the Silicon Valley, it's ultimate proof that size really does matter. She calls herself the Bio Goddess. Cindy Robbins Roth literally grew up with biotechnology in the 1980s. Now, she's a leading industry expert in San Mateo. She advises venture capital groups, drug companies, and even some biotech startups. Well, with biotechnology playing such a prominent role both in the Silicon Valley and around the world, we thought this would be a good time to catch up with Cindy and get her expert opinion on where biotechnology is taking all of us. Now, if you've got anything to do with biotechnology, and especially biotechnology in the Bay Area, well, then the name Cindy Robbins Roth is golden. And actually, Cindy, for some reason, you're also the bio goddess. Maybe you can explain that term to us.
Well, it kind of happened by accident. When I was involved in starting up BioWorld, it was an entrepreneurial company. We had all these meetings where people were arguing about whose title sounded more important. I got tired of the meetings, so one day I just said, I'm going to be the biotechnology goddess. You can be whatever you want. I'm not coming to another one of these meetings. And it kind of started from there, because when my business cards came, instead of saying editor-in-chief, they said biotechnology goddess.
So the name
I
stuck.
decided to go for it.
The name stuck, obviously. It's a pretty good name. But anyway, let's face it, this is where it started. The Bay Area is where biotechnology really got its start.
I certainly think so.
Yeah, but where are we going from here now? We have Boston, we have San Diego, we have around the world countries that are really ramping up their biotech environments. Are we competing, or are we still in the lead?
I think the Bay Area will always have a favored position in the sector, because there's so much of the history here, and there's such an incredible pool of knowledge in terms of individuals who have been part of building the sector, from the early 70s, have watched it grow, have lived through and survived, product disasters and, stock market disasters, and trying to make business and science come together, which is a very hard thing to do, and trying to develop completely new technologies. Doing something at a lab scale, that is doable. Building it into a commercially feasible pathway to make new products that you can actually sell, that's a whole different thing.
So you're saying that brain power is still based here?
I think a lot of the brain power is still based here. Now, clearly, these other regions have a lot to offer as well. And I think as we go forward, the Bay Area is going to have to accept that it's part of a global entity. An important part, but still a part.
A leader in the global entity?
I think so, because again, there's more of an experience base here. There are more people who have done more things and lived to tell the tale in the Bay Area than anywhere else. And I think we will remain a leader, especially if we continue to grow how we interact with all these groups outside the Bay Area.
That almost sounds like the marketing line for bringing the Stem Cell Institute here, is that we have the brain power here.
My thinking about the Stem Cell Institute is not perhaps in line with some of the other people in the industry. I think for taxpayers of the state of California, to put aside that kind of money for something like that made me very nervous. I think stem cells are an incredibly important area of cell therapy study, but you have to remember this is very early stage biology science. And just as we are still trying to figure out how to make gene therapy work in a clinically significant, reproducible way, and it's been, what, 15 years? I assure you, stem cells will not go any faster. And money to support the work and a political environment that supports the work is important.
Are you concerned about great expectations then?
Well, I think that just as when the Human Genome Project got officially launched and Tom Brokaw, was announcing, shareholders stand to make billions of dollars from this, and people are probably still going, well, when exactly is that going to happen? And it's been, what, a decade for that. People need to understand exciting science needs to be supported over incredibly long periods of time. You're probably not going to see the true commercial products that are going to affect more than a small handful of people in a clinical trial for at least another decade.
Now, there are a lot of buzzwords that certainly you've come across, but they kind of become household words to a lot of us. But they all seem to, when it comes to biotechnology, revolve around the term targeted drug design. What does that mean?
What that means is that you understand at a molecular level what in that patient is causing their disease, and you design drugs that act only on that target. Why is this different from what happened before? Because before, when we didn't have that molecular knowledge, the drugs that we developed, we could see that they acted on the symptoms of the disease, but they also were able to interact with other molecules and cells all over your body. That's where some of the adverse side effects come from. So biotech's dream has always been that the more we understood about how health and disease actually function in our bodies at that molecular level, the better we'd be able to come up with products that would only interfere with the disease processes and not interfere with healthy tissues.
Now, a lot of this comes down to, and actually goes back to, the Human Genome Project, which was, they called it biology's moonshot. And now, in a lab like we are right now at Zoma Corporation in Berkeley, they're here and they're progressing in a large part because of some of the discoveries of the Human Genome Project. Have we come as far as you thought we would be going at this point? And do we have a lot farther to go?
First, I'm going to tell you that Zoma Corporation and their technology was operating and being very productive well before the Human Genome Project came along. I mean, biology and the understanding of how to manipulate and target things, we understood how to do that long before Human Genome Project came along. Where the Genome Project is so important is that it starts to give you a way to much more rapidly start to figure out what genes are turned off and turned on in specific settings. We had ways to find that in small numbers before. It gives us a way to multiplex, to really accelerate the process. And again, I think where we are in the commercial application of all of that, which I'm using to mean clinically significant application to the Human Genome Project, we're pretty much where I thought we would be. The Genome Project gave you, in essence, a dictionary with all the words and none of the definitions. And so what we all have to do now is figure out what the definitions are and then what the heck they mean. How do you use that information to actually come up with a way to treat people that we don't have today?
Now, in your case, BioVenture consultants, you travel around the world. And by the way, I'm sure the folks at Zoma appreciate the fact that you corrected me on the nature of this company.
I've been writing about Zoma since the early 80s.
But in any case, you travel around the world with BioVenture consultants, and you meet with executives and researchers from, I think, New Zealand and Australia, and you've spoken with folks in Ireland and maybe many other countries. What do they have to gain from the Bay Area? And what is it about the Bay Area that's important to them?
Well, You're right. BioVenture Consultants has, since 1986, we've been working with emerging biotech sectors all over the globe and all over the U.S. in places that weren't in California or Boston. And I think what all these other regions have to gain from the Bay Area is both models of what works and what doesn't work. I mean, creating biotech companies is incredibly complicated. The science that you have is one small part of the puzzle. You know, the ability to put together a management team that can be successful, to raise the financing that's needed, to understand all the things that have to happen to get a product out the other end that's going to benefit not just your shareholders, but also the patients. It's an incredibly complicated process. Being part of the public policy discussion is incredibly important as well. So I think what these other regions look to the Bay Area for is examples of how to do things well and how to do things not so well. What are some of the problems you run into? Almost more importantly, they see it as a source of collaboration. Now, what do I mean by that? I think there's a huge change that's been in process in the biotech industry, coming both from the reality of the healthcare situation, the funding problem, what's happening with big pharma and how the public perceives it, but also major changes in the venture capital industry. I think we're at a time where even early stage companies in the Bay Area are finding out that the days of being able to raise $50 million between startup and IPO, being able to do that over 5 to 8 years and then go public, those days are gone. When you look at where the venture community is putting its money, it's mostly in a team coming out of an established company, bringing a couple of drug candidates in clinical trials with them, these specialty pharma, they're called. The early stage companies that still need to do research that aren't anywhere near the clinic, they're having a very difficult time raising money. Interestingly, the Bay Area experience now looks a lot like the difficulties in funding that all these other globally scattered regions have found. You don't have access to true venture capital in Australia, in New Zealand, in Scotland. And so those regions actually have something to share with the Bay Area, which is how do you come up with different models for how you build your biotech entity if you can't follow the classic Bay Area model of go out, raise 50 million and go public.
Is it the patient now who stands to lose from this? I mean, if it takes 5 to 10 years, $50 million, the money's not there, doesn't that mean that the drug pipeline could potentially turn into just a drip?
No, actually, I think that's not the case. I think the reality is because of what's happening in the healthcare environment, there is not enough money in the universe, I'm pretty sure, I haven't checked Mars, but there's not enough money in the universe to pay what we as private citizens have to come up with, what our employers have to come up with to pay for healthcare. And the big pharma industry and big biotech can argue all they want about how unfair it would be to put drug pricing in and how they can't possibly do their research. But the reality is it must come. It will come. And I think the challenge for our sector in the Bay Area and globally is, can we restructure what our industry looks like so that we can grapple with the reality that there has to be a different pricing structure.
You mean medical need is what is going to drive it and force us to come up with some alternative ways of doing it?
Exactly. And I think what we're seeing in the global sector is that, in fact, you can develop important product candidates without having this huge infrastructure. The other thing that we learned from what's been happening with big pharma and all the attention placed on it because of its problems is that while they do spend a lot of money for R&D, I assure you, they spend even more money on sales and marketing.
All right, then let's wrap this up with one final visionary question, if you will. I'm going to now rely on the bio goddess to put on her thinking cap and project into the future. What can we expect from biotechnology in the next 5, 10, 15 years, and will it come from the Bay Area?
I think in the next 5 years, you're going to continue to see a real change in the structure of the industry and companies, but you'll continue to see a huge flow of important products that are right now in the clinic coming out into the marketplace. We will continue to have a huge impact on how medicine is practiced. I really believe that. In the next 10 years, I think you're going to see a growing impact of pharmacogenomics as more information is collected and correlated between, well, what genes go up and down, and well, what the heck does that actually mean in the clinic? I think you're also going to see more really interesting, what I call mutant products, where you've got what you classically think of as devices being melded with drugs. And the Bay Area has a very important drug, medical device community. So when we think biotech, we shouldn't forget that that device community is going to become more and more important to this.
Like the drug-eluting stent, if you will.
That is just the tip of the iceberg. You know, I think as we start to integrate more gene therapy, gene silencing, cell therapy, including hopefully someday stem cells, you need to deliver those things in different ways. And I think the medical device community is going to be really important to us in delivering the things that we're discovering. 15 years down the line, I think that's when you're going to start to see clinically significant things coming from the stem cell arena. That doesn't mean important things aren't happening between now and then, but I think realistically, it's going to be 15 years before you see any kind of large-scale clinical trials happening.
Well, now I know really why they call you the bio goddess. You really know your stuff. We want to thank you, Cindy Robbins-Roth, for joining us, and we also want to thank the folks at Zoma Corporation in Berkeley for letting us feel at home in a biotech laboratory. Cindy is an author. You are a consultant with BioVenture Consultants, and you're obviously a very busy lady traveling, and we appreciate you spending a few moments with us right here on Tech Closeup. There's a lot more to technology than just bits, bytes, and computer code. Some people think technology could help solve some of the world's social problems too. So Christina King put together this story about a group of people who've committed their time and resources to basically making the earth a better place.
We actually destroy books in here.
It looks a little strange, but ripping the cover and binding off a book is how it all starts. Then the individual pages feed into a machine that actually converts the text into spoken words.
Being watched or not, which sometimes is a good thing.
The scanned books are filed into an internet library so the visually impaired can listen to literary works from their favorite authors.
We had 35,000 people reading books all over the world in 12 different languages, 60 countries.
Jim Fruchterman is the man behind the project Bookshare. He's president and CEO of Benetech, a nonprofit venture that takes high-tech but not so lucrative technology and puts it to work for the greater good.
When I was in college, I dreamed of making a reading machine for the blind. I was learning about making smart bombs, and I thought this would be a cooler application. Fast forward a decade later, I've started one of Silicon Valley's top companies in pattern recognition that reads books and documents. And we wanted to make a reading machine for the blind because it was really cool, but it didn't make any sense for our investors.
So Jim started his nonprofit Benetech, a company that uses technology to solve social problems.
I learned to dive for pearls until I learned many other things.
People could scan in books and share them with people with disabilities legally in a way that eventually will be sustainable through a modest subscription fee that will eventually pay what it costs to operate it.
Kind of like the music sharing website Napster, only Bookshare from the beginning has had permission from authors and publishers. Jim says the Bookshare idea came from his teenage son.
The woman who is the CEO of Napster at the end of 1999 lived 2 doors down, and her teenage son gave my teenage son Napster. And I looked at Napster and I said, ooh, this is cool. This is really illegal, but it's really cool. And then I said, oh, I wonder if we could use that same music sharing, peer-to-peer kind of idea to help blind and dyslexic people share books.
Bookshare is just one of several projects Benetech is developing. The company's software is currently keeping track of human rights violations in countries around the world. But this kind of social investment takes money.
Thank you for calling the Skoll Foundation. How may I help you?
That's where the Skoll Foundation in Palo Alto comes in.
Social entrepreneurs like Jim Fruchterman are why the Skoll Foundation exists.
Sally Osberg is Skoll's president and CEO. She says the foundation has made 2 sizable grants to Benetech.
Well, people like Jim Fruchterman see technology really as the ultimate tool of democratization. They see that it's the leveler, and they also see that most of the world's population doesn't have access to technology.
I think that's actually the way most technical people came to technology. It wasn't to get rich, it was because they love solving problems.
Launched 3 years ago, Bookshare will eventually go international. And instead of losing money, Jim hopes to break even. It's a story that would someday make a good book. Christina King for Tech Closeup.
You know, since we went on the air back in January, we have been thrilled with how fast Tech Close-Up's been picked up by cable community access stations around the Bay Area. We've gotten lots of feedback, but we could always use more. So send us your story ideas and your suggestions to our website at www.techcloseup.com. Thanks for joining us. I'm Mark Levinson. And as always, remember that if you want to stay close to all the technology that drives the Silicon Valley, join us next time then for another edition of Tech Closeup.